The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Welcome back to Harborough once again, people. Now, in true Leicestershire fashion, in this episode we're not going to be seeing just one village, we're going to be seeing three, although two of them are not villages really, they're hamlets. And one of them has got an interesting name, Baggrave. There's a really interesting tale about how that place got its name. Whether or not it's true, I don't know, but we'll find out at the end of this episode. Baggrave is down there. There's another settlement in this place called Ingarsby, which is to the south of the main village, and the main village itself we're about to have a walk around. This is Hungarton. Hungarton, Hunger Farm. Next up in Harborough we have the parish of Hungarton, which contains three settlements. They are Hungarton itself, Ingarsby and the hamlet of Baggrave. On top of those there's also something called the Quenby estate. This will be a fun one to get around, that's for sure. There's something quite peculiar about a couple of those names for a start. Hungarton literally means hunger farm, and it got that name because once upon a time around here the land was dry and barren. You would literally go hungry out here because nothing could grow in the fields. It's a bit different now, of course, what with modern farming techniques. Baggrave's name is even weirder. Legend has it that it gained the peculiar name thanks to a maidservant who committed a murder and buried the body of her victim in a potato bag, literally a bag grave. Whether that's fact or myth, well, we don't know, but I'll tell the story and you can decide afterwards. See, I told you this one was going to be fun. All three settlements are really in the middle of nowhere. We've come so far away from Leicester now, it's barely a speck on the horizon. Deep in the countryside, these villages are at least 10 miles away from any form of major civilization. That said, we have lots to cover still. Hungarton still has a church, a village hall, a small stream and a millennium green, and Stilton cheese was first produced in a dairy in the grounds of Quenby Hall. Hungarton's layout is based on a model village designed by Shuckburgh Ashby, a former Quenby Hall owner. Lots to see and discuss in this one then, so let's cut the talk and walk the walk. Let's start this episode off with the hamlet of Ingarsby, which lies to the south of Hungarton and to the east of Keyhouse, where we were yesterday. Ingarsby is not much more than a scattering of isolated houses and a few farms, but that's all there is to the modern village. Fans of earthworks and deserted medieval villages should definitely pay attention to this next bit. Ingarsby is one of the best preserved deserted medieval villages in England. The majority of the DMV site is situated on a slope off the lane through the hamlet, facing westwards. The settlement was probably founded by a Danish individual named Ingvar, and as such it was referred to as Ingvar's village. That would eventually morph into Ingarsby. This places its origins at some point in the 9th or 10th century. By Norman times, the settlement had grown to a substantial village. The Domesday Book reported some 32 households present. When the majority of the manor, at that time owned by the Daungervilles, was granted to Leicester Abbey in 1352, a dozen families lived in the village. It sounds small, but you have to remember that back then, those were astronomical figures for a rural village. Desertion occurred in 1469 when the abbey enclosed the land and converted most of it to sheep and cattle pasture. It was by far the most valuable Grange property in Leicestershire when it was sold at the Reformation in 1540. All that remains now are well delineated rectangular mounds that mark the house sites of the arable farmers that were driven out, and the hollow ways where the village streets and lanes once ran. Well, let me tell you something, people. There's loads of parking spaces along the side of the road through Ingarsby, so you can always pull up and have a walk. But finding a spot that was good enough to see the remains of this deserted medieval village, that's a different matter, because there's lots of trees and bushes that line the side of the road, so you can't really get a good shot of it. This is about the best spot, though, there is. So this is where I am, and you can see sort of some of the lumps and bumps in the field here. It's where this massive deserted medieval village complex was. But the problem is, because it's so high up, you can't really tell the extent of the earthworks, because this is a very hilly part of Leicestershire, and because of that you can't really see everything. But trust me, if you look at this on an overhead map, you will see the extent of Ingarsby's deserted medieval village. It's massive, it's huge. Honestly, it's well worth having a look at. Camera can't really pick up the earthworks from this distance, but trust me, it's there. And the sheep are enjoying themselves within the earthworks. They're the only residents, shall we say, of the village these days. Now, across the road from this, there's a rather large wall and a very big house. Now, I've got no idea what this house is, because when I did the research for this particular episode, nothing came up about a big house here. So we're just going to investigate this, I think, just have a quick look at it. I drove past it a moment ago and it's quite grand. I don't know what it's called, but if there's a sign on the outside, we will find out. Let's see. It seems to be very old, whatever it is. I would probably imagine 15th, maybe 16th century. And there it is. What a fantastic property that is. And they've got a fantastic view of the medieval village. It turns out that big building was Ingarsby Old Hall, which was built by Brian Cave when he acquired the manor after the dissolution. It was originally moated on 3 sides. The oldest fabric dates to the 1540s in the East Range. Another range was added by Sir Robert Bannister, who bought the manor in 1621. Now, Ingarsby also has some railway history. Here, we're heading for the site of an old station which was on the Great Northern Railway's Leicester branch line. It opened in 1882 and closed to regular passenger trains and goods in 1953. To the west of the old station, about halfway to the next one at Thurnby, lies Ingarsby Tunnel, which is 516 yards long. As well as the tunnel, Ingarsby also has a viaduct, which is the largest remaining structure on the Leicester section of the line, and it spans the valley of a small stream that runs to the west of Ingarsby village. We can't get to it though, it's totally inaccessible. Today, the line has been lifted and the station building serves as a private residence. Next up, we have the Quenby Hall estate to talk about. Again, we're still to the south of Hungarton, and we're now just a little to the north and east of Ingarsby. Quenby Hall is the key, really, to this whole episode. Without it, Hungarton village wouldn't be what it is today. Let's explain. Quenby Hall is a Jacobean house described by Sir Nicholas Pevsner as the most important early 17th century house in Leicestershire. A bold claim perhaps, but I don't think it's terribly wide of the mark. The hall is Grade 1 listed and its park and gardens are Grade 2 listed, both by English Heritage. Quenby is associated with the Ashby family, who acquired the estate in the 13th century. By 1563 they'd acquired the whole manor and soon afterwards moved to enclose and depopulate the village of Quenby, which is no longer a thing here. They would build Quenby Hall between 1618 and 1636. The man in residence at first was George Ashby, the High Sheriff of Leicestershire for 1627. Quenby Village's remains are in the present extensive parkland. It was never a big village. Records show it had a population of 25 in 1377. There may have been a house on the site of the hall before the building of the current one. The house is H-shaped and located on a hillside. It has 3 stories and a very shallow pitched roof. George Ashby was succeeded by his son, another George, who married the daughter of Usby Shuckburgh of Naseby in Northamptonshire. Their son, an MP for Leicestershire, was known as Honest George Ashby the Planter because of the large number of trees he planted at Quenby. He died in 1728, and in the mid-18th century Quenby Hall passed to his great-nephew, Shuckburgh Ashby, another MP for Leicester and Fellow of the Royal Society. Quenby Hall remained in the Ashby family until 1904. The house was bought in 1904 and restored by Rosamond Greaves and her husband Lord Henry Grosvenor, who restored much of the Jacobean interior. 20 years later it passed to Sir Harold Nutting, who'd acquired his fortune from bottling Guinness. At the end of the 1920s, he was master of the Quorn Hunt. Perhaps the best known fact about Quenby, though, would be its link to Stilton cheese. Stilton was first produced in a dairy in the grounds, and this ties in nicely with the next owners, the de Lisles. The de Lisles bought Quenby in 1972. They made extensive restorations, which eventually led to them creating a cheese-making business on the estate in 2005. This enabled them to bypass planning regulations banning the family from inhabiting the home full-time. The business failed in 2011 with debts of £250,000 caused by over-expansion. It had a turnover of about 1.8 million and employed some 40 staff. Although administrators were brought in to find a buyer, none was forthcoming due to an incident of listeria within the Quenby product. Mind you, the business did at least whack the value of the house right up. In 2013, the family put Quenby Hall up for sale for the eye-watering sum, get this, of £11.6 million. Part of the 2006 film A Cock and Bull Story was made at the hall too, by the way. Okay, so this is where we're going to start our route around Hungarton, and behind me you can see there is a pub. Now that is called the Ashby Arms, but on every map that I have used to plan this route, that's got a different name. It's called, on those, the Black Boy Inn. It looks like it's been renamed. Now we're in Hungarton and our main walk begins here at the Ashby Arms. This used to be called the Black Boy Inn. There are a few conflicting stories out there as to how the pub got that name. One theory suggests that the Black Boy was an actual human and he was a favourite of one of the 18th century owners of either Quenby Hall or Baggrave Hall. Another suggestion is that such a boy didn't exist and instead the pub is named for the crest of the Burnaby family who are associated with Baggrave. More on that in a bit. They definitely owned this building at one time when it was alternatively known as the Black Boy Hotel. I'm favouring, therefore, the latter theory myself. So, let's have a walk around the village now. Hungarton's shape and layout is all down to a former owner of Quenby Hall. It follows the layout of a model village built between 1764 and 1776 by Shuckburgh Ashby, who was owner of Quenby at the time. There are still a few cottages that predate his tenure and several houses that have been built since. Both Shuckburgh Ashby and George Ashby are buried in Hungarton, as is the 18th century travel writer Andrew Burnaby. We'll learn a bit more about the Burnabys, of course, when we get to Baggrave. Hungarton village predates the time of either family. In fact, it was first listed in the Domesday Book. Only one building now survives from medieval Hungarton, and that's the Grade II listed Church of St John the Baptist. Hungarton's early shift from arable to pastoral farming has left the parish rich in ridge and furrow, especially around the 3 deserted villages at Ingarsby, Quenby and Baggrave. Lots of ridge and furrow can be also found in Hungarton itself if you know where to go. A 2001 English Heritage study of the East Midlands identified Hungarton Parish as one of only 40 in the region retaining outstanding examples of ridge and furrow. It has been noted that such examples are of a national importance. We're about to reach the church, but just before we get to that, we have the War Memorial to see here on this bend in the road. It's situated on a high bank in front of the old rectory. For some reason, it only lists the names of 5 men, but there were 8 from Hungarton who were killed in action. That's a rather odd fact, but there we go. In total, 62 men from the parish served in World War I and World War II. Okay, now we come to the church, which is kind of obscured by trees there, but there is a path that runs alongside it, so let's go and check it out. So to the church, which sits high on a hill overlooking the surrounding countryside and can be seen for many miles around Hungarton. It consists of a western tower with a crocketed recessed spire, a nave, a chancel and a south aisle which leads to the Quenby Chapel. The church mostly dates from the Decorated period, but the clerestory is later and dates to the 15th century, when these really came into fashion and were added to so many churches. Inside, it still retains its original Norman font. It's of a square design and has some odd lozenge-shaped carvings. There are areas of seating here which were purposely set aside for the notable local families. The Quenby Chapel is probably the best feature here, and it has some monuments to the past owners of Quenby Hall, including Shuckburgh Ashby. His was created by Thomas Banks and depicts mourning women bending over an urn. On the north wall of the nave are some 18th century painted heraldic motifs to the Quenby Hall residents, and on one of them is an image of the Black Boy. From the churchyard you can go in two directions. If you head eastwards you'll be on a bridleway that runs into a massive wood called Hungarton Spinneys. However, that would take you away from the village and it's not very helpful for us. So instead we're going the other way, southwards, across a small stream and towards the Hungarton Millennium Green. And this crosses a lot of those ridge and furrow earthworks. So this field that we're crossing here has definitely got like an earthworky feel to it, as if there used to be something here in a past time. It certainly wouldn't surprise me being so close to the church, let me tell you. Now if you follow this, it'll take you to the Hungarton Millennium Green, which is somewhere down there in that little shallow valley. That's next. The Millennium Green is alongside a road called Barley Lees, and it was created by the Hungarton residents in the year 2000 to celebrate the turn of the 21st century. Other than this, the village has no other open green space, quite unlike others of its kind. That's rather unusual. This is managed by the Hungarton Millennium Green Trust, which is a charity. Its roles are to maintain it as a wildlife and conservation area and allow free public access. General maintenance work is carried out by the community. Income to cover any outsourced maintenance costs comes from village fundraising events. The final landmark in the village is the village hall, and this was built in around 1929. Nobody's terribly sure of the date though. It's a multi-purpose venue used for parties, meetings, events and local groups. It features a large hall, an ante-room and a professional kitchen. The main hall measures 12 metres by 8, whilst the ante-room is 5.5 by 4.5. Parking is available both at the side of the hall and on the street outside. And that's pretty much it for the main village. But we have one final job. And across the road from the village hall, you've got Hungarton's old school, which is that building right there. Now, from here, it's a simple case of walking straight back up through the village and back to almost where we began. Not quite at the pub, because I parked a little bit down the road from the pub, just in case a tractor or something came through the village. These are quite narrow streets, so you have to be kind of inventive with where you park. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the main walk around Hungarton. But we, of course, aren't done with this one yet. We've still got the story of Baggrave to tell. So lastly, we have the other hamlet in the parish. This is Baggrave Park, and in terms of features, it only really has one. That would be Baggrave Hall, an 18th century Grade 2 listed country mansion. The current house is a 2- and 3-storey building built in the Palladian style, constructed in ashlar in the 1750s. An extra wing in red brick can be dated to 1776. The grounds cover 220 acres. The hall was listed in 1951 but suffered serious damage from an owner between 1988 and 1990. Before the dissolution of the monasteries, the site belonged to Leicester Abbey. It was then sold by the Crown to Francis Cave, whose grandson, Sir Alexander Cave, sold it on before 1625 to Edward Villiers, half-brother of the Duke of Buckingham. The hall belonged in the later 17th century to John Edwin, whose grandson, another John, rebuilt it, but incorporated some parts of the 16th century manor house. In 1770, his daughter married the Archdeacon of Leicester, and so ownership of the estate passed to the Burnaby family. Later owners included Edwin Burnaby, the High Sheriff of Leicestershire, and his son and grandson. Algernon Edwin Burnaby, a former master of the Corn Hunt, also once lived here. Baggrave Hall was also the childhood home of Louisa Burnaby, one of the great-grandmothers of Queen Elizabeth II. Soon after Algernon Burnaby's death in 1938, Hugh Edwin Burnaby sold the estate, and it became the home of the Earl family, who themselves sold it in 1975. The fabric of the building was severely damaged between 1988 and 1990, whilst in the ownership of an overseas company controlled by Asil Nader, who had bought the estate for £3 million. Stonework was removed, walls were undermined, and interior walls, floors and ceilings were ruined. The current owner has rectified the damage as far as possible. Now, all of this is interesting enough, but what about the name of the place we're in? That, for me, is the best bit of this whole episode. Baggrave. It sounds funny, doesn't it? Well, here's the tale behind it. According to legend, it was named after an incident involving a maidservant who's said to have let a beggar woman take refuge at the hall. However, after later noticing the woman's boots, her suspicions were that the beggar wasn't a woman at all, and instead was a man in disguise. Fearing he was a robber, the servant murdered him, wrapped his body in a potato bag, and then buried him in it. That's where the name Baggrave apparently comes from. Now, this could be complete nonsense, but you really wouldn't put it past anyone to do such a thing, even in today's modern world. Put Hungarton in the books, folks. We've covered another fine parish here in rural Harborough. I really would like to know if you believe that tale about the potato bag murder. Let me know in the comments what your opinion of it is. It sounds a bit far-fetched to be true, but who knows exactly what went on in rural England centuries ago. Join me tomorrow for another DMV. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.